A flight delay seemed like just a minor inconvenience, until she saw the man sitting next to her, and everything changed in an instant. What unfolds is a gripping tale of secrets, danger, and survival that will keep you hooked till the very end. Before we begin, tell me where you're watching from and share your thoughts in the comments below. Let's dive into the story. Emily's heels clicked sharply against the polished tiles of the bustling terminal as she weaved through the sea of travelers at New York's JFK Airport. Her mind was already half on home, her small apartment in Brooklyn, the familiar scent of freshly brewed coffee at her favorite cafe, and the comforting quiet after a grueling week of meetings and pitches across the country. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a sterile glow over the tired faces crowding the gate area. Flight 239 to Los Angeles was scheduled to depart at 5:15 p.m., and Emily had arrived with just enough time to grab a quick bite and find her seat. She checked her boarding pass one last time, smiled faintly to herself, and slipped through the gate with practiced ease. The cabin was nearly full, the hum of voices and overhead bins slamming shut blending into a familiar symphony of travel. Emily settled into her window seat in row 14, arranging her carry-on bag beneath the seat in front of her. She exhaled slowly, glad for the brief moment to sit, to relax. But just as the flight attendants began their safety demonstration, the captain's voice crackled over the intercom, calm but firm. "Ladies and gentlemen, I regret to inform you that we're experiencing a delay due to a technical issue with the hydraulic system. We ask for your patience while maintenance crews work to resolve the problem." Murmurs of frustration rippled through the cabin. Phones flickered on, fingers tapped impatiently on screens. People glanced at watches, exchanged weary looks, and sighed in resignation. Emily's mind raced. A delay meant she'd be stuck in this metal tube longer, and that was the last thing she wanted after a week full of deadlines and sleepless nights. She glanced around, noting the passengers nearby. Most seemed absorbed in their own worlds, scrolling through social media or staring out windows at the tarmac. But one man caught her eye immediately. He sat alone a few rows ahead, his posture rigid, his gaze fixed straight ahead with an intensity that felt almost unnatural. Tall, with dark hair just brushing his collar and sharp, angular features, he looked like he belonged in some other place entirely, someone used to control, not waiting for a delayed flight like everyone else. Emily's curiosity piqued, but she tried to focus on her own thoughts. She unpacked her tablet, scrolling through emails she'd promised herself she'd answer on the plane. Yet her attention kept drifting back to that man. He reached slowly into a worn leather bag at his feet, pulling out something wrapped in an old cloth. The plane's overhead lights flickered slightly, and she caught a brief glimpse of a photograph he held carefully, almost reverently. For a moment, the cabin noise dulled around her. She felt a strange chill crawl up her spine, a sudden tightening in her chest. There was something about that photo and about the man himself that unsettled her deeply, a knot of recognition she couldn't yet place. As the delay stretched into half an hour, Emily noticed the tension in the cabin mounting. Voices grew louder, frustration mounting. Flight attendants circulated with water and reassurances, but nothing seemed to soothe the growing impatience. The man remained still, clutching the photograph tightly, staring out the window as if searching for something beyond the airport's chaotic confines. Emily's eyes met his for a fleeting moment, and she quickly looked away, a jolt of electricity running through her veins. Her heart raced, pounding louder in her ears. She tried to rationalize the feeling, jet lag, stress, or maybe just a trick of the light. But deep down, she knew there was more to it. She had seen him before. She was sure of it. But where? When? The thought nagged at her relentlessly. The captain's voice returned, announcing a further delay while the technicians ran more checks. Another 2 hours, at least. Emily closed her eyes, rubbing her temples. This flight was becoming a nightmare, but there was no escape now. All she could do was wait and watch and wonder about the stranger whose face she had seen and frozen at. And just like that, the quiet tension in the cabin transformed into something far more charged. The beginning of a story that neither Emily nor the man could yet understand, but both were about to live through in ways they never expected. Emily shifted in her seat, eyes discreetly drifting back to the man a few rows ahead. He was still there, as still as a statue amid the restless crowd, his sharp jawline set in a way that suggested worry or determination, maybe both. There was something magnetic about him, something she couldn't shake no matter how much she tried to focus on her own delayed flight. His dark eyes seemed to hold 1,000 stories, but the one thing that made Emily's heart thud louder was the unmistakable aura of solitude around him. He was alone in a sea of strangers, and yet he seemed entirely self-contained, wrapped up in some invisible, heavy weight. The man's hand moved slowly, pulling the worn leather bag closer. Emily's curiosity turned into cautious interest. What was inside that bag? Something important, no doubt. His entire demeanor screamed urgency masked by exhaustion. The leather was scratched and faded, as if it had traveled far, carried through many hands. The way he protected it made Emily's imagination run wild with possibilities. Was he carrying evidence? A secret? Or just memories? As the minutes ticked by, the man's eyes flicked around the cabin occasionally, sharp and alert, never quite relaxing. Something in his gaze made Emily's stomach twist. She could tell he wasn't just another traveler caught in a delay. His presence felt charged, almost electric. Then, suddenly, his eyes locked with hers. That moment was brief, but Emily's breath hitched, and she turned away quickly, feeling exposed and oddly vulnerable. It was the kind of glance that felt like a warning and an invitation at the same time. Emily tried to settle back into her seat, forcing herself to concentrate on the magazine she'd brought along. Yet, her thoughts wouldn't let her. Questions buzzed relentlessly. Who was he? Why was he so tense? Had he really noticed her? Was it chance or something deeper? She found herself watching him more intently as he finally unwrapped what looked like an old photograph from the cloth inside his bag. The lighting was dim, but she could just make out the outline of a woman's face. The expression on his was instant. Pain, longing, fear all mingled into one. The cabin around them felt distant and muffled, as if the photo and the man's silent grief had created a bubble separating them from the rest of the passengers. Emily's heart pounded. She had seen that face before, on a news website just days ago, flashing on TV in a story about a missing woman. The realization hit her hard. This man was connected to her in some way. Maybe he was the missing woman's husband or brother. The idea sent a cold shiver down Emily's spine. Around them, life in the cabin continued. A child cried softly. A couple whispered to each other. An elderly man flipped through his newspaper. But Emily was locked into this moment, glued to the stranger's quiet agony. The flight attendants came by again with updates, but their words barely registered. Emily's eyes never left him, searching for clues in his expression. Then, unexpectedly, the man's hand tightened around the photo. His jaw clenched, and he took a deep breath, almost like preparing himself to say something he hadn't dared before. Emily's curiosity wrestled with caution. Should she approach him? Would he want to be bothered? Yet, the connection between them felt like a fragile thread that might break if ignored. The seconds stretched longer than the delay itself. Emily found herself leaning forward, heart racing. What would she say if she spoke to him? How could she offer comfort without intruding? The noise of the waiting crowd faded as her attention narrowed to this mysterious man, whose presence had shifted the atmosphere of the entire flight. Then, as if reading her hesitation, the man slowly lifted his eyes again. This time, instead of the intense stare from before, there was something softer, almost pleading. Emily's breath caught. She understood in that instant that he was waiting for someone, or something, and the delay had trapped him in this liminal space between hope and despair. For the first time, Emily felt compelled to break the silence that stretched between them. She needed to know more, to understand the story etched on his face and the meaning behind that fragile photo. The flight delay that had initially frustrated her was no longer a mere inconvenience. It was the beginning of a moment that might change everything. The hum of the plane's engines filled the air, But Emily's attention was entirely consumed by the man in front of her. Every few minutes, she found her gaze drifting to his intense eyes, the kind that seemed to hold stories darker than any ordinary traveler's. Yet he was strangely quiet, isolated in the crowded cabin, a fortress of tension wrapped tightly around him. She couldn't help but wonder who he was and what burden he carried so heavily. Then, out of nowhere, his eyes caught hers again, sharp and unwavering. This time, the look was different, loaded with recognition, like a flash of lightning across a stormy sky. Emily froze, her breath catching in her throat. For a split second, the world seemed to still, the noise around them dimming to a distant murmur. The look was too intense, too deliberate to be accidental. It was as if he was searching for something in her eyes, something buried deep in her memory. She glanced away quickly, cheeks flushing with a mix of surprise and something she couldn't quite name. A knot tightened in her stomach, that strange, unsettling feeling that she had seen him before, somewhere important, but couldn't place it yet. The delay stretched on, and the cabin grew restless with the slow drip of frustration. Passengers shifted in their seats, murmuring about missed connections and lost time. But for Emily, time warped strangely. Seconds felt like minutes, and minutes like hours. The man's presence was magnetic, pulling her attention away from the usual distractions of travel. His gaze haunted her, stirring memories just out of reach, like a puzzle missing its last piece. She caught herself watching the worn leather bag resting at his feet again. It looked ancient, battered by time, almost like a relic. He occasionally reached down, clutching the bag with a protective grip that suggested more than just personal belongings inside. Emily's curiosity spiraled. Was this bag tied to the missing woman she'd seen in the news? Was the man desperate for answers, or carrying something that held the key to a mystery no one else could solve? Her mind flashed back to the photograph he had briefly shown before, a woman's face, soft and vulnerable, framed by a cascade of dark hair. The missing persons report she had read days ago played on loop in her thoughts. The woman had vanished without a trace, leaving behind questions and a family shattered by grief. Emily's journalistic instincts kicked in, pushing her to understand the man's story, to connect the dots that were forming between them. As the flight attendants walked the aisle again, Emily's heart pounded louder with every step the man took. His body language spoke of exhaustion, fear, and a desperate hope all at once. The way he held onto that photo made her realize how fragile his world was at that moment, balanced on the edge between despair and the faintest flicker of hope. The delay that had seemed like a mere inconvenience was now a stage for something much bigger. Suddenly, the man shifted in his seat and turned slightly, as if summoned by some inner voice to act. His eyes met hers again, this time softer but still searching. Emily felt the weight of the moment pressing down, a silent invitation to cross the invisible barrier between strangers. But fear and uncertainty held her back, 1,000 what-ifs swirling in her mind. What if he didn't want to talk? What if she was wrong about recognizing him? What if the truth was darker than she imagined? Yet beneath all those doubts, a strange calm settled over her. This delay had brought them together for a reason. She couldn't ignore the pull any longer. The man seemed to carry a story that needed telling, a story she might be part of, whether she was ready or not. As the flight's delay stretched into the unknown, Emily realized this unexpected meeting was about to change the course of her life. The man glanced at the photo once more before carefully folding it and slipping it back into his bag. His fingers trembled slightly, betraying the stoic exterior he tried to maintain. Emily felt an urgent desire to reach out, to break the silence that separated them. She had to know who he was, why he was here, and what fate had intertwined their paths on this delayed flight. The restlessness around them continued, but in that small, suspended moment, Emily's world narrowed to the stranger who held a photograph and a secret, and to the first flicker of recognition that would unravel everything she thought she knew. The cabin lights flickered softly as the pilot's voice came over the intercom again, calm but unmistakably final. "Ladies and gentlemen, We regret to inform you that the delay will extend for at least another 2 hours due to ongoing maintenance issues. We appreciate your patience and will keep you updated." The collective sigh of the passengers filled the cabin like a wave. Phones came out again, faces reflected on tiny screens lit with frustrated texts and calls. Emily felt the exhaustion seep deeper into her bones. The creeping weariness that had been building all week now settling in for what felt like an endless wait. But her eyes couldn't stray far from the man a few rows ahead, the stranger whose face had become a haunting image in her mind. He remained motionless, his posture stiff, gripping the worn leather bag as if it held his last hope. Around him, the other passengers began to settle in for the extended delay. Some reclined their seats, others pulled out snacks or books. Yet he was different. The tension radiating from him was palpable, an invisible charge in the air that even the hum of the cabin couldn't drown out. Emily's curiosity was like a slow-burning fire now. The flicker of mystery around him demanded her attention. Suddenly, the man reached again into his bag, this time pulling out the photograph without the protective cloth. Emily's heart thudded loud enough she was sure he could hear it, even though he was staring intently at the image, lost in memories she could only guess at. The photograph was yellowed with age at the edges, slightly creased, but the woman's face was clear, bright eyes, a soft smile, an expression caught somewhere between hope and fear. Emily's breath caught as recognition struck again. This was the missing woman, the same face from the news stories that had run endlessly over the past week. The ones Emily had skimmed past, trying to stay detached from such tragedies after her exhausting trip. She leaned forward, daring to glimpse the photo just a little more clearly. The man's fingers trembled as he traced the outline of the woman's face with a slow, reverent touch. His eyes, dark and haunted, flicked up toward the ceiling, then back to the photo. For a moment, time seemed to pause between them, thick with unspoken grief and desperate hope. The surrounding voices and restless shuffling of passengers felt distant, irrelevant. Emily's journalist instinct stirred, the need to understand overriding her hesitation. Who was this man? What was his connection to the woman who had vanished without a trace? Why was he here, on this delayed flight, clutching a photo like a lifeline? The questions burned inside her, but she held back, unsure how to breach the invisible wall he had built around himself. Yet, every detail screamed that this was no ordinary stranger. His presence was a key, and the delay was more than just bad luck. It was fate. As the minutes dragged on, the man shifted, his gaze darting nervously toward the cabin windows. He seemed restless, as if trapped not just by the flight's delay, but by something deeper, an invisible weight that no one else on board could see. Emily noticed how tightly his jaw was set, the faint tremor in his hand when he folded the photograph carefully and tucked it back into his bag. The contrast between his quiet despair and the mundane airport chaos made his pain all the more vivid. Suddenly, the man glanced directly at Emily. This time, the look was softer but edged with a raw vulnerability that made her breath hitch. It was a silent plea, an unspoken question that passed between them in that charged moment. Emily felt a strange pull to respond, to offer a word, a gesture, something, anything to bridge the gap between two strangers bound by a moment neither could explain. The overhead lights flickered again, casting shifting shadows over the cabin, as if mirroring the storm of emotions inside Emily's chest. The delay was far from over, but something else had shifted too. The man's guarded expression softened just slightly, and Emily's mind raced with the possibilities of what lay beneath that surface. Was he seeking answers? Comfort? Redemption? The announcement faded into background noise as Emily found herself leaning forward, heart pounding, eyes locked on the man who carried a burden heavier than any of theirs on this delayed flight. In that suspended moment, the cabin ceased to be just a place between destinations. It became a crossroads, where two strangers were about to cross paths in a story neither expected, a story that would change both of their lives forever. Emily sat stiffly in her seat, heart still racing from the silent exchange of looks with the man. The airplane's interior buzzed with restless murmurs and the occasional rustling of bags. But for her, the noise felt distant and muted, swallowed by a growing tension that hung between them. Something unspoken bridged the space in the aisle, a faint whisper of recognition that sent shivers down her spine. She scanned his face again, committing every detail to memory. The way his brow furrowed slightly when he was deep in thought, the subtle tremble in his fingers as he clutched the leather bag, the raw pain hidden behind his otherwise composed facade. But where had she seen him before? It was as if her mind was playing tricks on her, assembling fragments of a memory too faint to fully grasp. Her curiosity won over caution. Emily decided she had to know more, to break through the veil of mystery surrounding him. Maybe this delay was an unexpected chance, a pause in time that destiny had woven to bring them together. The idea stirred something deep inside her, a sense of purpose she hadn't felt in weeks. The man shifted in his seat again, pulling the photo from his bag one more time. He stared at it with an intensity that spoke of desperation and loss, his eyes moist but resolute. Emily felt the urge to speak, to reach out and ask him who the woman was, why she mattered so much. But her voice caught in her throat, and she hesitated, torn between empathy and the fear of intruding. Suddenly, the man glanced her way once more. This time, there was no hardness in his expression, just a flicker of hope, maybe even relief, as if he'd been silently searching for an ally amid the faceless crowd. That small moment of connection broke the ice that had held Emily back. She swallowed her fear and forced herself to speak, her voice low and tentative. "Excuse me, I saw the photo. Is she someone you're looking for?" His gaze locked with hers, searching her eyes for something, maybe understanding or kindness. Then, slowly, he nodded, a barely perceptible movement that held the weight of unspoken stories. "Her name's Rachel. She's missing. We don't know where she is. It's been weeks." His voice was steady but carried a fragile edge, as if every word was painful to say aloud. Emily felt a lump rise in her throat. She remembered the news reports, a young woman, vanished without a trace, leaving behind worried family and unanswered questions. The story had haunted her in the background of her busy life, and now it was suddenly real, tangible, sitting just a few rows ahead on this delayed flight. "I've seen the news," she admitted quietly. "I didn't realize." Her voice trailed off as she struggled to find the right words. He gave a faint, bitter smile. "Most don't. It's like she disappeared into thin air." His eyes dropped to the photo again, his fingers tightening around its edges. "I'm her brother. I've been searching everywhere, police, friends, anyone who might know. But nothing." Emily's heart clenched. The flight delay, the random seating, the worn leather bag, all of it suddenly felt like more than coincidence. This wasn't just a chance encounter. It was the beginning of a story that needed to be told, a story that might bring light to the darkness surrounding Rachel's disappearance. "Maybe I can help," Emily found herself saying before she even realized it. Her instincts as a journalist, the part of her that thrived on uncovering truth and giving voice to the unheard, flared to life. "I've covered missing persons before. Sometimes a fresh perspective helps." He looked up, surprise flickering in his eyes, mingled with a cautious hope. "You would do that?" "I want to," she said firmly, "if you let me." The man nodded slowly, as if a great weight had just been lifted, even if only slightly. "Thank you, Emily," he said quietly. "I'm Daniel." And just like that, the delay, once a frustrating interruption, transformed into a fragile, unexpected connection between two strangers, bound by a shared hope and the unspoken promise of a journey just beginning. Emily felt a strange warmth wash over her as Daniel introduced himself. The man she had been watching all this time was not just a stranger. He was someone carrying a profound loss, a story that needed to be told. The air between them shifted, no longer filled with curiosity alone, but with a quiet, shared purpose. Emily's mind raced, piecing together what she knew and imagining what lay ahead. Here, in the middle of a delayed flight, bound nowhere for now, two lives had collided, connected by something neither could yet fully understand. Daniel reached into his bag again and pulled out a small, worn notebook, the edges frayed from countless hands flipping through its pages. "This is everything I have," he said, voice low and steady. "Contacts, leads, bits and pieces that might mean something. I haven't given up, but it's like chasing shadows." Emily took the notebook gently, feeling its weight. The pages were filled with scribbled names, addresses, phone numbers, and a few desperate notes, fragments of hope and frustration intertwined. It was a map of a journey marked by grief and determination. "We'll start here," she said, meeting Daniel's eyes. "Maybe there's something we missed." The cabin around them was restless, but Emily barely noticed. Her focus was on the man beside her and the mission they had suddenly inherited. The delay that had seemed like a mere inconvenience was now a window of opportunity. 2 hours, maybe more, to begin unraveling a mystery that had swallowed an entire family's peace. "Tell me about Rachel," Emily prompted gently. Daniel's face softened as he began to speak, his voice carrying the weight of memory and love. He told her about his sister's laughter, her dreams, and the day she vanished without a trace. The story unfolded like a fragile thread, pulling Emily deeper into the world of loss and unanswered questions. As Daniel spoke, Emily noticed a subtle shift in his demeanor. The weight he carried seemed slightly lighter, shared now with someone who cared. For the first time since she boarded the plane, she saw a flicker of hope in his eyes, a hope that maybe, just maybe, the delay would lead to something more than frustration. It could lead to answers. The minutes passed quickly, filled with whispered conversations and exchanged ideas. Emily jotted down notes, her mind alive with possibilities. She suggested contacting local authorities, reaching out to people Rachel might have known, and checking places Daniel hadn't yet considered. Each plan was met with a nod, a spark of determination igniting between them. Then, as if fate wasn't done weaving its web, the man who had been sitting just a few seats away, the one Emily noticed first, suddenly turned toward them. His gaze was steady and intense. "I couldn't help overhearing," he said quietly. "If you're serious about finding her, I might have something that can help." Emily's heart skipped a beat. The delay had brought more than just Daniel and her together. It had summoned others willing to help. The stranger reached into his own bag and pulled out a small envelope, worn but carefully sealed. "This was left for Daniel a few days ago," he said. "No return address, no explanation. Just this." Daniel took the envelope, hands trembling slightly. Emily watched as he carefully broke the seal, pulling out a folded piece of paper inside. The words on the page were cryptic, but unmistakably a clue, a location, a date, and a message that hinted at Rachel's whereabouts. The cabin seemed to hold its breath. The delay had stretched longer, but for Emily and Daniel, it was no longer a pause in travel. It was the first step toward unraveling a mystery that could finally bring Rachel home. Emily looked at Daniel, determination shining in her eyes. "We're going to find her," she promised. And in that moment, surrounded by strangers caught between destinations, a fragile alliance was born, one fueled by hope, courage, and the unbreakable bond of human connection. The envelope trembled slightly in Daniel's hands as he unfolded the paper inside. Emily leaned closer, her eyes scanning the neat handwriting that detailed a specific address on the outskirts of a small town in Northern California, along with a date just 2 days prior. Beneath it was a simple message: "She's safe, but not for long." The words sent a chill through the cabin, more powerful than the recycled air or the distant drone of the engines. Daniel's voice was barely a whisper when he spoke. "I don't know who sent this. I've had no contact with anyone but the police and a few friends. This changes everything." Emily felt the weight of the moment settle around them like a fog. The delay that had once been an annoyance had turned into the first real breakthrough in weeks of uncertainty. The passengers around them had grown weary and restless, their own frustrations mounting with each passing minute. Yet in that cramped airplane cabin, time seemed to slow, the world shrinking to the three of them and the fragile hope that fluttered between. Daniel's fingers tightened around the letter as he studied it again, determination flickering in his eyes. We have to follow this lead. I have to know if Rachel is alive. Emily nodded, the journalist in her now fully awakened by the urgency and raw emotion before her. We will, she said firmly. But first, we have to get off this plane and get moving. The thought of the maintenance delay felt distant now, overshadowed by the race against time that lay ahead. Daniel glanced toward the flight attendants and the small cluster of passengers crowded near the exit, then back to Emily. Do you think he'll let me off early? His voice held a flicker of hope and hesitation. If this is true, I can't wait. Emily smiled gently. We'll find a way. Her mind already began racing with possibilities, contacting authorities, arranging transportation, and mapping out the route to the mysterious address. There was no time to waste, no room for delays or second-guessing. Suddenly, the intercom crackled again, the pilot's voice apologetic but firm. We understand the frustration, folks. We're doing everything possible to resolve the issue and get you safely on your way. The announcement was met with a chorus of groans and sighs. But for Emily and Daniel, it was background noise to a much bigger story unfolding in real time. The man who had handed Daniel the envelope remained quiet, watching them carefully. Emily caught his eye and nodded slightly in thanks. There was an unspoken understanding between them now, a fragile alliance forged in the tension of shared purpose. The stranger's presence was no longer an intrusion. It was part of the strange, winding path that had brought this story to life. As the flight delay stretched further, Emily and Daniel talked quietly, making plans and sharing stories. She learned that Rachel had always been adventurous, a free spirit with dreams that sometimes put her in risky situations. Daniel's eyes darkened when he spoke of the last time he saw her, the day she disappeared into the mist of uncertainty. The fear and hope mingled in his voice like a storm. The hours passed slowly, but each one brought new resolve. Emily's mind buzzed with possibilities, strategies, and contacts she could call once they landed. The photograph, the notebook, the mysterious letter, all pieces of a puzzle that seemed to be falling into place despite the odds. Finally, the pilot's voice came again, signaling a tentative lift of the delay. We'll be preparing for departure shortly. Thank you for your patience. The cabin stirred, anticipation mixing with relief. Emily looked at Daniel, her heart steady but her mind racing. Soon, we'll be on our way. Daniel nodded, clutching the envelope tightly like a lifeline. We're closer than ever. As the plane finally began to taxi, the strange journey that had begun with a delayed flight and a frozen glance was about to take its next step, toward answers, toward hope, and toward a reunion long overdue. The plane finally touched down at the regional airport, just as the sun dipped low, casting golden hues across the tarmac. The delay had stretched long enough to wear down most passengers, but for Emily and Daniel, it had ignited a fire that refused to dim. As the engines hummed to a stop, Daniel gripped the mysterious envelope tightly, the worn edges creased from his restless hands. Emily glanced at him, noticing the mixture of exhaustion and fierce determination etched into his face. This was no longer a journey of frustration. It was a race against time. The cabin slowly emptied as passengers gathered their belongings, eager to finally be free from the confines of the delayed flight. Emily moved carefully alongside Daniel, mindful of the fragile energy between them. Neither spoke much. Words felt unnecessary when the weight of the unknown pressed so heavily. But inside, both minds were already racing ahead, piecing together the next steps. Once they were off the plane, the airport buzzed with a quiet urgency. Daniel approached the airline desk, asking about possibilities to reschedule or expedite travel to the small town named on the note. The agent, sensing the desperation in his voice, pulled some strings, managing to secure seats on the earliest shuttle bus departing for the rural region the next morning. It wasn't ideal, they'd have to wait hours, but it was the best option available. Emily and Daniel found a small cafe near the terminal and settled into a corner booth, the envelope and notebook spread between them on the table. The fluorescent lights cast a stark contrast to the fading daylight outside, mirroring the urgency and hope mingling inside their small bubble. Daniel traced the handwritten note again, his eyes scanning the unfamiliar address and date. 2 days ago, he murmured. Whoever left this knew we were close. It's a warning. We have to hurry. Emily nodded, her fingers brushing the edges of the notebook, filled with countless leads and dead ends. We need to prepare for every possibility. This could be a trap or a genuine cry for help. Either way, we can't ignore it. Her journalist instincts sharpened, every cell alert, every plan forming in her mind with razor focus. She pulled out her phone, ready to contact local authorities and friends who might assist once they arrived. As they strategized, Daniel's phone buzzed with a message. He glanced at it, then his face paled. It's from an unknown number, he said, voice trembling. The text was brief but chilling. Stop looking or she'll be lost forever. Silence fell over the table. The threat was clear. Rachel's disappearance was tangled in dangers deeper and darker than Daniel had imagined. Emily reached across and placed a steadying hand on his. We won't stop. Not now. Her resolve was unshakable, fueled by the raw urgency of the moment. Together, they made a silent pact, to face whatever came next with courage, to fight for answers even if it meant risking everything. The hours passed with restless anticipation. Emily contacted every lead she had, while Daniel sifted through his notes again, searching for overlooked clues. When night settled fully, they retreated to a nearby motel, humble and quiet, where they could rest briefly before the early journey ahead. Sleep was elusive, each second weighted by hope and fear. As dawn broke, Emily and Daniel boarded the shuttle bus bound for the small town, the landscape blurring past the windows like a moving canvas of possibility. The address on the note was no longer just words. It was a destination that held the promise of truth, reunion, and perhaps rescue. With every mile, the mystery tightened its grip, drawing them closer to the edge of discovery. Neither spoke much on the bus. The silence was thick but filled with unspoken determination. Emily's gaze lingered on Daniel, seeing in him a reflection of her own drive, a fierce refusal to surrender to despair. Whatever awaited them at the journey's end, they would face it together, bound by a fragile hope sparked by a delayed flight and a frozen glance. The shuttle bus rumbled down the winding roads as the sun climbed higher, painting the sky in soft shades of blue and white. Emily sat by the window, her eyes tracing the shifting landscape of tall pines and sprawling fields that seemed untouched by time. The small town they were approaching was a world away from the bustling city they had left behind, quiet, isolated, and cloaked in an eerie stillness that both comforted and unsettled her. Daniel sat beside her, the envelope and notebook resting on his lap like sacred relics. His fingers tapped nervously against the worn leather of his bag as the bus drew closer to the destination marked in the cryptic note. When the driver finally announced the stop, a dusty crossroads framed by a weathered gas station and a small diner, Daniel exhaled deeply. The town looked like something out of a forgotten postcard. Streets empty except for a few locals who watched them with wary eyes. Emily felt a prickle of unease but kept it hidden, focusing instead on the mission ahead. Every step mattered now. They stepped off the bus and onto the cracked pavement, the scent of pine mingling with the faint aroma of coffee and oil from the diner's kitchen. Daniel pulled out the address once more, confirming their route. It's just a few blocks down, near the edge of town, he said quietly. His voice carried a mixture of hope and exhaustion. If Rachel's here, this is where we'll find her. Emily scanned the area, her reporter instincts alert to every detail. The chipped paint on the storefronts, the faded signs, the cautious glances of passersby. Something about the town felt like it was holding its breath, waiting for something to break the silence. She glanced at Daniel, whose jaw was clenched with determination. "Let's move," she said softly. As they walked, Daniel shared stories of Rachel, her laughter, her dreams, the last time he saw her before she vanished. His words painted a vivid picture of a vibrant young woman caught in circumstances no one fully understood. Emily felt the weight of his pain and the strength of his resolve, a force that drove them forward despite the unknown dangers lurking beneath the surface. They arrived at a small, dilapidated house at the end of a quiet street, its windows dark and curtains drawn. The handwritten note's address matched the peeling numbers above the door. Emily's heart quickened. This was it, the place that might hold the answers they had been searching for. Before knocking, Daniel hesitated. "We don't know what, or who, we'll find inside," he warned. "But I have to try." Emily nodded, her hand steady as she raised it to the door. With a firm knock, the sound echoed through the stillness, breaking the town's fragile silence. Moments passed. Then, the door creaked open slowly, revealing an older woman with wary eyes that softened as she recognized Daniel. "You came," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Thank God you came." Inside, the house was modest but filled with signs of life. Photographs, worn furniture, and the scent of home. The woman introduced herself as Margaret, a friend who had been watching over Rachel. Her eyes darted nervously, hinting at secrets kept and dangers faced. Emily sensed that beneath the surface of this quiet town, a deeper story waited to unfold. Margaret led them to a small back room, where a phone rested beside a chair. "Rachel's been here," she said, voice low, "but she's scared. Someone's been watching her. She left this for you." From her pocket, she pulled out a torn piece of paper with a phone number scrawled hastily. Daniel's hands shook as he took it, hope and fear warring in his eyes. Emily felt the surge of adrenaline that comes with the possibility of breakthrough, a step closer to uncovering the truth, to finding Rachel alive. As they prepared to make the call, a shadow flickered across the window. Both Emily and Daniel glanced toward it, senses heightened. The quiet town held its secrets tightly, and the road ahead promised to be more dangerous than they had imagined. The dim light in the small back room barely illuminated the anxious faces of Daniel and Emily as they stared down at the crumpled piece of paper Margaret had handed over. The phone rested heavily beside them, a lifeline dangling just out of reach. Daniel's hands trembled slightly, the weight of uncertainty pressing down with a crushing intensity. Emily could feel the electric tension in the air. Every heartbeat seemed magnified in the stillness. Finally, Daniel reached out and lifted the receiver, his breath shallow and uneven. "I'm going to call," he whispered, more to himself than anyone else. Emily nodded, her eyes sharp and unwavering, ready to capture every detail of what would come next. This was the moment that could change everything or shatter what little hope remained. He dialed the number slowly, each tone echoing like a distant bell. The silence stretched unbearably long until a faint voice answered on the other end, shaky but unmistakably real. "Rachel." Daniel's voice cracked with emotion. "It's me, Daniel. I'm here. We're coming for you." Emily watched as a flicker of recognition crossed Daniel's face, his eyes watering with relief and disbelief. The voice on the other end was faint but unmistakably his sister's. Rachel, alive, safe, yet terrified. The conversation that followed was fragmented, hurried whispers, warnings, promises to stay hidden. Rachel's words painted a picture of confinement, fear, and a shadow of an unknown threat looming over her. Emily scribbled notes feverishly, the urgency in Rachel's voice fueling her determination. Rachel explained she had been forced to move frequently, hiding from someone who wouldn't stop searching. She was protected by a small group of allies, including Margaret, but her freedom was fragile. The mysterious message that had led Daniel here was a plea for rescue disguised as a warning. As the call ended, Daniel collapsed back into the chair, his breath catching in his throat. "She's closer than we thought," he whispered, eyes still fixed on the receiver. "But she's in danger. We have to act fast." Emily felt a surge of adrenaline course through her veins. The delayed flight, the mysterious envelope, the small town. Every piece had fallen into place with a precision that felt almost impossible. Now, the race against time was real and immediate. They had to find Rachel before those who hunted her could silence her forever. Margaret, sensing their urgency, offered what little help she could. "There's an old cabin in the woods, not far from here," she said quietly. "It's where Rachel stays when it's safe. But be careful. The people looking for her have eyes everywhere." Emily's mind flashed to the shadows she had glimpsed outside the window earlier. The danger was real and close, but the chance to bring Rachel home outweighed any fear. "We'll find her," she promised, locking eyes with Daniel. They gathered what little supplies they could from Margaret's house, a flashlight, a map, and a few essentials, and stepped out into the fading daylight. The town's quiet streets seemed more ominous now, every sound amplified in the growing dusk. Emily's heart pounded as they approached the edge of town, where the dense forest loomed like a dark, impenetrable wall. The path was rough and overgrown, but Daniel moved with purpose, guided by the directions Margaret had given. Emily stayed close, her senses alert to every rustle and whisper in the trees. The tension was unbearable, a silent reminder that time was running out. As they neared the cabin, a faint light flickered through the trees, a small beacon in the encroaching darkness. Emily's breath caught. This was it, the place where Rachel waited, vulnerable but alive. The delay that had seemed like a setback now felt like a blessing, a chance to rewrite a story that could have ended in despair. They stepped forward together, ready to face whatever came next. The search was far from over, but for the first time in weeks, hope burned brightly in their hearts. Rachel was alive, and they were coming to bring her home. The forest thickened as Emily and Daniel pushed through tangled branches, their footsteps muffled by a blanket of fallen leaves and pine needles. The faint flicker of light from the cabin ahead grew steadier, a fragile glow piercing the growing darkness. The scent of damp earth and wood smoke hung heavy in the air, mixing with the tension that tightened their chests. Every snap of a twig, every rustle of leaves made them both freeze, ears straining for any sign of danger. This was no ordinary rescue. It was a delicate mission cloaked in shadows and fear. Daniel's eyes darted between the trees and the path, muscles tense with anticipation. Emily, notebook tucked securely beneath her jacket, felt her pulse quicken. The quiet of the woods was unsettling, nature's stillness masking the unknown threats that lurked just beyond sight. "We're close," Daniel whispered, his voice barely audible over the whispering wind. Emily nodded, gripping her flashlight tightly as the cabin came into clearer view. The structure was small and weathered, its wooden walls stained by years of rain and sun. Smoke curled lazily from the crooked chimney, promising warmth and shelter. Yet the place looked abandoned, the porch creaking under their careful steps. Emily's journalist instincts screamed caution, but Daniel's urgency pushed them forward. This was Rachel's refuge, fragile, fleeting, but real. As they reached the cabin door, Daniel hesitated, glancing over his shoulder. "We don't know who else might be out here," he warned. Emily's fingers hovered over her phone, ready to dial for backup if needed. But first, they had to see Rachel. They exchanged a quick nod, and Daniel raised his hand to knock softly, the sound swallowed quickly by the dense forest. The door creaked open slowly, revealing Rachel's pale face, eyes wide with fear and disbelief. Time seemed to stop for a moment as Daniel stepped forward, voice trembling with relief. "Rachel, it's me. We're here to get you out." Tears welled in Rachel's eyes as she stepped back inside, shutting the door gently behind her. Emily followed quietly, absorbing the tense atmosphere of the small room. Inside, the cabin was modest: a worn couch, a small table littered with papers, and a single bed pushed into a corner. Rachel sank onto the couch, hands trembling as she clutched a faded photograph. Her voice was barely a whisper as she began to speak, unraveling the story that had kept her hidden and frightened. "They won't stop looking for me," she said, eyes flickering with pain. "It started with debts I never knew about, and then threats, people who wanted something I didn't have." Her words hung heavy, filling the cramped space with a chilling reality. Emily's pen flew across her notebook, capturing every detail. Daniel sat beside Rachel, holding her hand, offering silent comfort. Despite the fear in Rachel's voice, there was also strength, a fierce will to survive that resonated deeply with them both. The danger was real and close, but so was hope. Suddenly, a sharp noise outside shattered the fragile calm. All three froze, hearts pounding. Emily peered through the window, catching a shadow slipping behind a tree. "They're here," Rachel whispered urgently. Panic surged, but Daniel's voice was steady. "We can't stay. We have to move now." Quickly, they gathered what essentials Rachel could carry. Emily's mind raced. The forest was vast, but the hunters were relentless. The path ahead was uncertain and perilous. As they stepped back into the night, the glow from the cabin faded behind them, swallowed by the dense trees. With every step, they moved further into danger, but also closer to freedom. The delay on the flight, the cryptic message, the small town, the hidden cabin, all threads weaving a story of survival and courage. Now, the Real chase had begun, and Emily and Daniel were determined to see it through, no matter the cost. The moment they slipped out of the cabin, the cool night air wrapped around them like a shroud, dense with the scent of pine and damp earth. The forest that had offered Rachel refuge now felt like a labyrinth of shadows, alive with the threat of unseen watchers. Emily's heart pounded fiercely, each beat echoing the urgency that surged through their veins. Daniel's grip on Rachel's hand was firm yet desperate, grounding her as they moved quickly but cautiously through the thick underbrush. Their breath came in quick bursts, the sound masked by the rustle of leaves beneath their feet. Every crack of a twig snapped taut nerves as they navigated the winding, narrow path Margaret had described, a trail barely visible under the faint glow of Emily's flashlight. The further they moved from the cabin, the heavier the silence grew, broken only by distant animal calls and the occasional whisper of wind through the trees. Emily's mind raced, piecing together the story Rachel had shared in the cramped cabin. Debts turned deadly, shadows of threats from unknown enemies, and the loneliness of a hidden life. Yet now, with Daniel beside her and Rachel clinging to hope, the fear seemed to transform into determination, a fierce will to reclaim freedom. Suddenly, a sharp snap echoed closer than before. Daniel froze instantly, pulling Rachel behind a thick tree trunk. Emily's breath caught in her throat as she scanned the darkness. A shadow flickered near the edge of the path. Someone was following them. The hunters had found their trail. "We have to keep moving," Daniel hissed, urgency threading his voice. "They can't catch us here." They pressed on, hearts pounding, adrenaline sharpening their senses. Emily's flashlight flickered, threatening to die, and she quickly shook it to revive the beam. The beam cut through the blackness, revealing gnarled roots and tangled branches, obstacles that slowed their flight. Rachel stumbled, but Daniel caught her before she fell, their bond a lifeline against despair. Emily called out softly, "Stay close. We can make it to the road if we're careful." The promise of escape lay ahead, a road that could lead them back to the safety of the town and hopefully to help. Behind them, muffled voices drifted through the trees, cold and determined. The hunters were closing in, their presence a grim reminder of the stakes. Emily's thoughts flashed to the delayed flight that had brought her here, to the cryptic message, to the faces of strangers turned allies. Every step now was a gamble with fate. As they neared the edge of the forest, a flicker of light appeared ahead, headlights cutting through the darkness. Relief surged, but caution stayed firm. The road was no refuge if the hunters had anticipated their route. Daniel whispered, "There's a car waiting." Margaret sent help. Emily's heart lifted, the thread of hope becoming tangible. With one last burst of energy, they burst onto the road. The car's door swung open, and a familiar face greeted them. Margaret, her expression taut but resolute. "Get in," she urged. They piled into the back seat as tires screeched and engines roared, the vehicle speeding away from the forest's edge. Inside the car, Rachel finally allowed herself a shuddering breath, tears spilling down her cheeks. Daniel held her close, whispering reassurances. Emily jotted down every detail, her heart swelling with relief and determination. The danger was not over, but they had bought precious time. As the car sped toward the town's safety, the night sky stretched wide and dark above them, a canvas of stars bearing silent witness to the courage, fear, and hope that carried them through the darkest hours. The chase was far from over, but for now, they were alive. Together. The car's tires hummed steadily against the worn asphalt as it sped away from the suffocating shadows of the forest, the warmth inside a sharp contrast to the cold fear they had just fled. Rachel leaned into Daniel's shoulder, her body trembling from exhaustion and relief. The distant throb of their pursuers' footsteps felt momentarily muted by the roar of the engine and the protective bubble of the car. Emily sat across from them, clutching her notebook and phone, the urgency in her chest slightly abated, but far from gone. Margaret's eyes were fixed on the road ahead, lines of worry etched deep into her face. "We're not out of danger yet," she warned quietly, voice tight with the knowledge of what they faced. They know Rachel's close, and they won't stop until they get her. The weight of her words settled heavily on the small group. Emily absorbed every detail, her mind racing with questions and possibilities. The story unfolding before her was raw and urgent, a tale of survival tangled with danger and desperation. Her reporter instincts kicked in fully now. She knew this was more than just a rescue mission. It was a fight for justice and truth, one that demanded patience, care, and relentless determination. Daniel reached over and squeezed Rachel's hand gently. "You're safe now," he said softly, though his eyes betrayed the fear that still clung to him. Rachel nodded, tried to believe it, but the memories of threats and narrow escapes lingered like shadows she couldn't shake. "I never thought I'd see this day," she whispered, voice cracking. "Thank you for not giving up." Emily's heart ached with the weight of those words. The delay at the airport, the strange envelope, the journey through the town and woods, everything had led to this fragile moment. Yet the story was far from over. There were still questions to answer, dangers to confront, and healing to begin. Margaret's phone buzzed sharply, breaking the silence. She glanced down, eyes narrowing. "We have to move again," she said, urgency flashing in her gaze. "They're closing in faster than we thought. We need to get Rachel to a safe house, a place even they can't find." The group exchanged determined looks, resolve hardening despite the exhaustion. The road ahead was uncertain and perilous, but retreat was no longer an option. Rachel's safety depended on their next moves, swift, careful, and coordinated. As the car sped through the quiet roads, Emily felt a surge of purpose. This story was no longer just words on a page. It was a living, breathing fight for a woman's freedom and peace. Every moment, every decision was critical. They reached the outskirts of the town as dawn began to soften the horizon, painting the sky in gentle hues of pink and gold. The sleepy streets seemed oblivious to the drama that had unfolded beneath their watchful facades. Margaret guided the car into a narrow driveway leading to a small, unassuming house surrounded by tall hedges. "This is it," she said. "Safe, quiet. No one knows it's here except a trusted few." Daniel and Rachel exchanged a hopeful glance, the first genuine spark of safety since their ordeal began. Inside, the house was sparse but welcoming, a sanctuary offering a chance to rest, regroup, and plan. Rachel sank onto a worn sofa, the exhaustion finally catching up to her. Daniel sat beside her, holding her close as Emily pulled out her notebook once more, ready to document the next chapter. Though the night had been harrowing and the dangers still loomed large, the fragile peace of the safe house was a beacon. For now, they were safe. The fight was not over, but hope had taken root, a powerful reminder that even in darkness, light could be found. The safe house sat quietly under the soft morning light, a fragile bubble of calm in a storm of uncertainty. Inside, the air was thick with unspoken questions and fragile hopes. Rachel sat on the edge of a threadbare couch, her fingers nervously tracing the worn fabric as Daniel and Emily exchanged meaningful glances. This was the moment they had all been waiting for, the time to uncover the truth behind Rachel's ordeal and the shadows that had chased her for so long. Rachel took a deep breath, steadying herself. "There's so much you don't know," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "It started years ago, long before all of this." She told them about a business deal gone wrong, a partnership that had spiraled into betrayal and threats. The people chasing her were connected to a dangerous syndicate, a group with far-reaching influence and no hesitation to use violence to get what they wanted. Emily scribbled notes rapidly, capturing every detail, every fear and hope woven into Rachel's story. Daniel listened intently, his jaw tight with anger and resolve. The pain in Rachel's voice was unmistakable, the weight of betrayal heavy in the room. She explained how she had tried to escape, to sever ties, but the syndicate's grip was relentless. Each attempt to break free had led to deeper threats and tighter chains. "I never imagined I'd have to run like this," Rachel confessed, tears glistening in her eyes. Emily's mind raced, connecting the dots, the delayed flight, the cryptic message, Margaret's cautious help. Everything pointed to a complex web of danger and courage. But now, with Rachel's story laid bare, the stakes felt clearer and even more urgent. They weren't just fighting to protect her life. They were confronting a powerful enemy hidden behind layers of fear and secrecy. Margaret arrived shortly after with news that heightened the tension. "They're mobilizing," she said grimly. "More people are searching. We have little time." The urgency was palpable. They needed a plan, and fast. Rachel's story wasn't just a personal nightmare anymore. It was a battle that could expose a criminal network and bring justice, if they survived long enough to tell it. The safe house, once a sanctuary, now felt like a front line. Daniel and Emily began coordinating with trusted contacts, piecing together strategies to protect Rachel and gather evidence. Emily's journalist instincts were sharper than ever. This was more than a story. It was a mission to uncover the truth. As the day wore on, Rachel's strength seemed to grow, fueled by the support around her and the possibility of justice. The fear that had once paralyzed her was slowly being replaced by determination. Together, they vowed to fight not just for survival, but for a future free from the shadows that had haunted her. The secrets unveiled that day would change everything, forging new alliances, awakening old fears, and setting the stage for a confrontation that would test their courage to the limit. The road ahead was uncertain and dangerous, but for the first time, hope felt real and powerful. The tension was palpable as night fell over the small town, cloaking the streets in shadows and anticipation. Inside the safe house, Emily, Daniel, Rachel, and Margaret huddled around a makeshift map spread across the table, plotting their next moves. The syndicate's reach was vast, their methods ruthless. But tonight was the night they planned to end the nightmare once and for all. Rachel's hands trembled slightly as she pointed to a location marked on the map, an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town, where the syndicate's leader was rumored to hold court. "This is where it all started," she said quietly. "If we can expose him, everything falls apart." Daniel nodded, jaw clenched, his protective instinct flaring. Emily's heart pounded. As a journalist, this was her moment to uncover the truth, but as a person, she felt the weight of the danger surrounding them all. The group moved silently through the darkened streets, cloaked in the stillness of the night. Every step carried a mix of fear and resolve. The warehouse loomed ahead, an imposing structure of rusted steel and broken windows, shadowed by the moonlight. Inside, voices echoed faintly, a reminder that the enemy was near. Emily's breath caught as they slipped through a side entrance, the stale air thick with dust and tension. They found themselves in a cavernous room, shadows dancing along the walls as they moved closer to the center. There, the syndicate's leader sat, flanked by guards, his cold eyes scanning the room. Suddenly, a sharp noise, a dropped flashlight, shattered the silence. Instantly, the guards were alert, weapons drawn. Chaos erupted as Daniel stepped forward, shielding Rachel while Emily raised her phone to start recording. "This ends now," Daniel's voice rang out, firm and unyielding. A fierce confrontation followed. Shouts, scrambling feet, the clash of wills and fears. Rachel stood tall, the woman who had once fled in terror, now confronting the source of her nightmare. Margaret's quick thinking and knowledge of the building's layout helped them navigate the chaos, evading capture and disarming threats. Emily's camera captured every moment, the evidence they needed to expose the syndicate's crimes and save Rachel's life. As police sirens wailed in the distance, summoned by a trusted ally, the tide turned. The leader and his guards were surrounded, their reign of terror crumbling. In the aftermath, Rachel was safe, her nightmare finally over. The small town breathed a collective sigh of relief as justice was served. Daniel and Emily stood beside her, their bond forged through the trials they had faced together. The story Emily had chased from the delayed flight to the hidden cabin had reached its powerful conclusion, a testament to courage, truth, and hope. The dawn broke softly over the quiet town, casting a golden light that felt like a promise of peace, healing, and new beginnings. After the harrowing ordeal and the final confrontation, Emily, Daniel, and Rachel found themselves standing together, stronger and changed by the storm they had weathered. The night's chaos had given way to calm, and with it came a sense of hope that had once seemed impossible. Rachel looked out over the town from the porch of the safe house, her eyes reflecting the morning sun. The weight that had burdened her for so long felt lighter, as if the chains of fear and danger were finally breaking. "I never imagined I'd get this chance," she whispered, her voice steady but soft. "To live without running, without looking over my shoulder." Daniel squeezed her hand gently, a silent vow that she would never face the future alone. Emily sat nearby, her notebook closed, but her mind buzzing with thoughts. The story she had uncovered was more than just headlines and articles. It was a journey of courage, survival, and truth. Her reporting had helped bring justice and give Rachel a voice. And in doing so, it had changed her own life, deepening her understanding of the fragile strength people carry within them. As the town slowly stirred to life, the trio knew their paths would soon diverge, but the bond forged in the crucible of fear and hope would endure. Rachel planned to rebuild her life, free from the shadows that had once threatened to consume her. Daniel promised to stay by her side, helping her heal and rediscover joy. Emily, ever the storyteller, was already thinking about how to share this tale with the world, a story that needed to be told, not just for Rachel, but for everyone who fights against darkness. Margaret arrived with news that the syndicate was dismantled and their victims could finally begin to recover. The law was on their side now, but it was the courage of a few brave souls that had truly turned the tide. "You all made a difference," Margaret said with a rare smile. "This town is safer because of you." The air was filled with a quiet optimism. The delayed flight that had seemed like a minor inconvenience was actually the first step in a remarkable journey, a journey from fear to freedom, from silence to truth. Emily realized that sometimes the smallest moments hold the greatest power. As the sun climbed higher, Rachel, Daniel, and Emily shared a final look, a mix of gratitude, relief, and hope. The story was ending, but their lives were beginning anew. Together, they stepped forward into the light, ready to face whatever the future held. Thank you so much for joining us on this incredible journey, a story of courage, hope, and the power of truth to overcome even the darkest fears. Rachel's path from fear to freedom reminds us all that sometimes the smallest moments can change everything. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more gripping tales, please don't forget to subscribe to our channel. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below and share your favorite part or what you think might happen next. Your support means the world to us and inspires us to keep bringing you stories that captivate and inspire. Until next time, stay safe and keep believing in the power of hope.